Of course, we'll talk about that when we get to our panel, which let's do the keep answering the questions, because I'm going to ask the panel the very same question when we bring them up right now. I would like to introduce Brendan and Eric. Brendan and Eric, how's it going? What we're going to do today, first, introduce yourself. We'll start off with Brandon. Introduce yourself and tell me what is the skill or thing you want to learn about in 2024.
How's it going, Shaun? Thanks for having me. My name is Brandon Evans. I am an application developer who somehow became a security person over the past couple of years, and I've been absolutely loving it. My areas of focus are multi-cloud security and application security, and I'm also, in addition to being a consultant in those areas, I'm the lead author alongside with Eric of Sec 510, Public Cloud Security, AWS, Azure, and GCP, where we teach you how to prevent a wide variety of types of attacks in the cloud using defense in depth mechanisms.
Very cool. Welcome. And I like that how I was applications and then I went to security, and usually it's you found a problem, right? I mean, because I was applications developer way back when. I remember my friend going, "Hey, there's this thing called SQL injection." I was like, "Oh, that's so cool." That's how I got it. So, all right, welcome. So,
yeah,
Eric,
I mean, no one grew up thinking they were going to be an application security architect when they grew up. Everybody said astronaut or something else. We all found our ways here.
Yeah, actually, that is very true. That is very true. All right, Eric, if you introduce yourself and tell us what kind of skills tool you're looking forward to in 2024.
Yeah, so I'll join the club here. It's been a long time, but I started out in software development, also doing web app development, probably right as the OWASP Top 10 came out, and eventually ended up on an AppSec team, which evolved into doing a lot of DevSecOps work and cloud work. So all of the infrastructure as code things and automated pipelines and those sorts of topics are really what I focus on day in and day out at my day job at Puma Security. So that's the tool chain I work with on a pretty much a regular basis. I've been fairly knee deep in Kubernetes over the last 6 months or so. I can thank Andrew Martin from Control Plane over in the UK for that. We started working on some Kubernetes stuff several years ago, and it's just now starting to resurface in a lot of the work that I'm doing. So I think a professional goal for me in 24, I work a lot with the authorship team on Sec 540, and as Brandon mentioned, Sec 510 and Sec 549, which is Cloud Enterprise Security Architecture. But I think professionally, I'm going to try to grab the Kubernetes Security Specialist certification this year and see if there's any kind of nooks and crannies of that ecosystem that I have not run into yet. Try to get some more hands-on experience with that.
Very cool. All right. Well, welcome. And I didn't answer the question myself about what I would be interested in. I don't know if I could say for 2024, but I have been diving into GraphQL. I'm kind of old, so REST interfaces was where I've been running for so long, and so much of the tooling that we're interacting with is GraphQL, and with Microsoft Graph API and those kind of things, it just seems like GraphQL is going to be a bigger play. So I have been starting my January looking at those kind of things. So we pop back up on the screen, kind of the active poll, you're still free to answer the questions. I like that more Microsoft certs. AI was all over the place. So I'm guessing we're going to be talking about AI today when we ask some of the questions. So thank you. And thanks for joining me. So let me ask Brandon, what is a trend in 2023 that surprised you? And think about not just what you read about, but when you talk to folks in your classes. Like, what is something you saw happening in 2023 that kind of surprised you? You weren't expecting?
Well, I was kind of happy to see that AI did not just show up and then disappear. You know, we've had a lot of different hype cycles over the past couple of years. There's been a lot of discussions about blockchain. There's still conversations about blockchain, but as a lot of people have seen, a lot of that infrastructure fell apart in 2023. So I've seen a lot of people compare AI to blockchain in terms of its utility and that it's kind of a fad. And I like to see that AI immediately proved that it had a lot of good use cases. It already proved that it had a lot of good use cases, but it proved that large language models specifically can be very useful, although flawed. And I'm glad that that has continued throughout the year. I'm also happy to see that people are starting to understand the limitations of this tool, not dismissing it completely, but understanding that it has some significant limitations such as hallucinations and how we should not just trust everything it says. But I'm glad that we're having a more mature conversation about this technology that's clearly here to stay versus other technologies that may be fading away in the near future, if not have already faded away.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it feels different because I think people are saying, "Oh, it's a tool. So how can I best use this new tool?" That's, and it's not just I don't know, a thing where I don't know. The blockchain stuff has always been really interesting. NFC was kind of like, okay, I don't know if I need these playing cards, but there's, some interesting things you could do with them. But I think we're going to see more and more with that AI. All right, Eric, question to you. What is the thing you saw in 2023 that surprised you most about cloud?
There's a lot of research with stolen credentials and the MITRE attack framework with long-lived creds and ways to establish persistence in cloud environments. And what I would say is a trend that I liked in 23 was the huge push across the board from the public cloud providers towards workload identity and updates to all the web interfaces to essentially steer you away from generating long-lived service account keys and access keys and things like that, with large disclaimers on the screen saying, hey, you're about to maybe do something that's an anti-pattern. Maybe you don't want that access key that's going to live for 3 to 4 years, and instead consider setting up, OpenID Connect or a SAML federated identity connection, into a cloud environment rather than using their native auth systems. So that was one thing in 23 that I loved, the push forward there from the providers telling the rest of us this is how we should be doing it, rather than relying on the way that we've done it for many, many years leading up to this point.
Oh yeah, and it took a while for some of the cloud providers to get better integration with like these single sign-on services, but even for some of them, it's still hard to do, short-term credentials when they're going in and out of their cloud environments. They just haven't given really good tools for that, and I hope we see them fix it, because long-term creds are just so dangerous and so
Yeah.
hidden in some cases.
Yeah, and GitHub Actions, I think, was one of those catalysts there that, they were one of the primary CI/CD systems that really paved that road. And GitLab too, with their CI, when both of them started publishing all the research on here's how to authenticate through OIDC into AWS, Azure, and Google, I think that was the real set of documentation that showed everybody the way to do it and to do it right. So that was awesome.
And it's still not super easy, but it's better. But I just went through trying to set that up. Yeah. Yeah,
It's
Brandon.
still very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. I mean, we published a code snippet that shows you how to do this from one cloud provider to another, and I'll post that in the chat in just a moment. But just creating the bare bones example of Lambdas that upload to the different cloud providers automatically, it was thousands of lines of both Terraform and application code. I tried updating the SDK for Microsoft and it just broke everything. And not to mention, there's no current way of getting Azure resources using AWS credentials natively, because AWS can't generate an OpenIDC Connect token at all. So there are some integrations that are hard. There are some that are impossible today. And as a result, Eric, you could speak to this better than I can. Are we even really seeing a whole lot of adoption from the majority of organizations?
I think workload wise, that's very rare. As you're describing a Lambda cross authenticating into like Azure storage or something like that. I think it's becoming much more commonplace for CI/CD pipelines. I think that is being pretty heavily adopted at this point, rather than just handing them an access key to Terraform to go build my infrastructure. We're seeing more of the OpenID Connect configs on that side. I think that's a lot more common.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And I think it may be because if you're going to do on a CSD pipeline, you put a lot of focus on a single system, you get it working. Whereas if you're doing like all these federated services, each dev team kind of has their own process, unfortunately, and they don't all match up. And so I think it's that federation of resources versus, bringing it all together into a CSD pipeline. Yeah, absolutely. I'll say from my perspective, so AI would be a one that I wouldn't say is a trend for 2023 in terms of security, because I haven't seen generative AI being used too much right now. It's kind of everyone's trying to figure it out and play with it. Being GitHub, we're using generative AI for code, but I wouldn't count that for the security side. I will say one thing I was surprised about, I saw in my students in class, is that at the beginning of the year when I would say, hey, what cloud are you all using? They were all like AWS and then maybe some of the other ones. And by the end of the year, most people were doing Microsoft and then also AWS, but they were all in Microsoft. And I don't know why, I don't know why that transition is happening, but I can see, and it wasn't just because they're moving from one to the other, but they're adding to it. So they're starting to go into that multi-cloud. Part of it is because the company bought another company. That tends to be an acquisition-based multi-cloud. But then they're just trying to figure out, how do I kind of interact with these different clouds for different purposes? And so I think I think that's the thing I was most surprised about in 2023. Yeah,
it's getting even more extensive. We recently did the 2023 multi-cloud survey, and I mean, it's just almost every organization does a little bit in one cloud provider of each of the big three, and in many cases the big six, which is unbelievable. I think this is maybe just going to the point of how much technology sprawl there is out there, where people just can't standardize. But also, I think there's a lot of myths about what we can get out of multi-cloud, like high availability and being able to negotiate our way out of having a very expensive bill by saying we're going to go from AWS to Azure, not understanding the tremendous amount of operational cost involved with getting all of that working. So it's good for Eric and I, because we teach the multi-cloud course here at SANS, but maybe not so good for the industry, because it makes it really hard for us to get a grapple around these technologies, both from a functionality perspective and a security perspective.
Well, let me ask the folks that are listening at home or at work or wherever you are, which clouds are you in? And if you're in multiple clouds, just pop them in the chat. We'd like to be able to see, because that's one of the first things I do in class is what clouds you're in. So I'd be interested, especially with such people all over the world. So let us know what cloud you're working in the chats, and we'll take a look at them. I know that like America's very much been AWS, and in Europe it's a lot of Azure and that kind of, but I can see them going back and forth, and it might be because so many companies are multinational. They're working all over the places, so that's probably why we're seeing a lot of that multi-cloud too. I'll say from you all giving your perspective as for protecting, but for the classes I teach, which is on detections, that multi-cloud is very difficult, because now the two operators that have to analyze all this data now have logs that look completely different, right? And different approaches, and they're deployed differently, and it's very frustrating for them. And so, I don't think we're going to ever see a single pane of glass stuff. We've been talking about that. I mean, I was government. We talked about that all the time. Never made it. So
there's no incentive to allow for a single pane of glass.
Yeah.
That will get rid of AWS's number one asset, which is their vendor lock-in and their popularity. Although Microsoft's trying to do that from the Defender side. But yeah, I mean, there can be some level of unification. It's never going to be that we have one API that you can use to interact with all three clouds. Because if I was AWS, the first thing I would do is break that. The first thing I would do is introduce some kind of important bug fix that actually just broke all those integrations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so looking at people that are popping in, there's a fair amount of AWS, there's some Azure, GCP. I see a couple of people saying like their own. So they must be running something that they're building that there is their own cloud environment, which is, all the work and cost. Yeah. But a couple of people listing multiple ones. So definitely we're seeing multi-cloud, GCP, a couple of GCPs on here. So
I saw the Finops response, and I don't know if you all saw on the news, it was either last week or the week before, but Google Cloud announced that they would, if you apply for this window, you can get free egress charges to move all of your data out of Google Cloud if you decide to leave. And as I look at 24 and what I think is coming, and it's related to FinOps, and you've also seen like DAH and Hay posting research on costing And is it actually cheaper to be running some of this stuff on-prem? I do think customers are going to really start scrutinizing their cloud bills. And I think they're going to start doing some pretty deep dive cost analysis in which cloud provider is it going to be most cost effective for me to be running in. And I think as far as system designs and trying to build things so it's not as dependent on AWS or Azure or Google, so we can attempt to minimize cost, I think that's going to be a huge push. And Google suspending those egress charges kind of shows the trending there on, can we actually be able to be free of the lock-in, as Brandon mentioned, with AWS specifically, and some of those ridiculous charges that live inside of those ecosystems? Like, will we see egress charges go down? Will we see the NAT gateway finally free us from our $30 per availability zone a month cost? And, you know, some of those really silly things I could see starting to be loosened up a little bit on the costing side.
Sounds like a free return policy is what I hear they're trying to do, right?
Yeah, and it's
Kind
I
of,
think it's
yeah.
smart from a sales perspective. Like, here, you can come in, you can test our Kubernetes clusters out, you can use BigQuery, and if you hate it, you can leave for free. You're not stuck here forever. It's an interesting move there.
Well, I know I
Google's
had
doing
one.
a lot of creative things in that area. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but I was late to the party to learn that Google and Aramco partnered to bring a lot of data centers to Saudi Arabia. And wow, that's a very interesting play, and will definitely help them.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're going to see large companies, financial companies maybe, or governments that are like going to spend a lot more money on a couple cloud providers to get that rolling better and driving, security requirements or things that are going to be helpful for everybody. And, most of the companies and countries are kind of doing multi-cloud, so they're kind of spreading out a little bit, right? I kind of see that. So, well, let's ask our next question. So, was that all about trends in 2023?
Yes.
We didn't even get to the second question. I'm looking at my notes. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was one. Okay.
I foreshadowed.
All right. So yeah. So what are some things that you're going to see in 2024 that are either good or bad that you're concerned about and that you think we need to be spending more time in? And I'm going to hit Brandon with this one to start off.
All right. Going to start off with some negativity. So I'm going to say something that I think a lot of people are feeling. Technology is getting worse. I think objectively getting worse. Things that used to work just stopped working. Google Maps, broken all the time. My browser giving glitches all the time. On Facebook, I have all these jumping around icons and elements. Right now, I'm looking into the screen that I'm recording on, and I just see a black screen. No one else has the same issue as me. Oh my goodness, there's a whole lot of issues I've had. And if I get another error message from Slack Mobile telling me that I have failed to upload a file from my phone to a Slack channel, I'm just going to throw the dang thing. I mean, we solved this problem 30 years ago with email attachments. So why is this happening, and why do I think this is going to continue to get worse in 2024? I have a couple of theories. The first one is that technology is getting harder. By a large margin, it's getting harder. There's this article I'm going to share with you in a moment, which is called What It's Like to Be a Developer in 2015, which was a very funny satirical article about how things had gotten so complicated from 2005 to 2015. And now we're in 2024, and things have just continued to go in that direction. The second one is a lack of training. We have a lot of developers who are joining the workforce without a computer science degree, such as people coming from boot camps. Now, I'm not trying to be an elitist or gatekeep. In fact, one of my proudest moments in my entire career was teaching a coding boot camp. But the fact of the matter is, folks with that lack of formal training need mentorship in order to make sure they don't introduce both functional bugs and security bugs. And that brings me to my third reason, which just really exacerbates that issue: layoffs. We saw over 250 million layoffs in 2023 that we know of on layoffs.fyi. And there's probably many, many more. And when you have people stressed to the maximum, they can't provide the mentorship necessary to help those people get to the next level and make sure that they don't introduce security issues. So we opt to put more and more work onto less and less people, outsource more and more things to AI. And I just see that this trend is very alarming, with things breaking both in the virtual world and in the real world, with the 737 MAX 9 door that blew off a plane, which delayed all of my travel plans, and hopefully no one else here. So we've got a lot of challenges in front of us just as a result of the workforce.
Well, all right. So let me ask the audience this. We had this question. What is the things that you see that are both good and bad in 2024? Let us know, like, kind of what you're seeing in predictions for that. Also, what software or hardware did you have to fix over the break that was breaking all the time? I know I usually have to do computer roundup around the house and fix stuff. It sounds like the airplane doors are blowing off for Brendan, can't get home. So, Eric, let me ask you, what is some trends you see in 2024, either good or bad, and that you're looking forward to in cloud security operations?
The AI thing came up a lot, and I am excited for 24 to see security advances, especially on the monitoring threat intel side. There's no reason that these bots can't be trained to essentially start running our queries for us and looking for anomalies and alerts and some of those really fun things that I think we can get to as an industry as we start to really leverage that technology to take care of some of that maybe level 1 kind of triage and analysis. So that's something I'm excited to see if we can get some advancements there. Brandon, as you went through your whole spiel about technology being broken, it reminded me about Kelsey Hightower, probably almost 10 years ago, at one point tweeted, and he's knee deep in Kubernetes and all things microservices at that point. And he tweeted, are we going to look back in 10 years and realize that this whole microservices thing was a horrible idea? And as you went through all of these different things that are broken, all I can picture in the back of my mind is just all these little containers crashing left and right, and then a cluster spinning them back up and trying to get it back to full capacity. So, as we expanded all of that complexity, are we finally starting to see some of the downsides of going this distributed route versus having the big monolith app that consistently just ran and handled all the requests? Maybe. Will that be a trend in 24? I highly doubt it, because that's just the way that things are working right now. But it'll be interesting to see if that ever turns around.
Yeah, I'll just say on the microservices, but I'm not an expert because I don't build production code that uses microservices, but I have moved code from server-based into or client server into microservices, and I love the capabilities I got out of it, because I was able to have things be able to elastically build up and down because we moved it on-prem into cloud. But it was more complicated to build and manage, and it's a little bit more hidden. And so, like, if a little thing goes wrong, it's hard to see until everything goes wrong, So I think I would love to see microservices, but with better orchestration and management that's a little bit more built in. I've not done it in Microsoft, but like in AWS, you're kind of up to your own to implement your own things. And it's a little bit too much up to your own. I think I would love to see a little more tooling to help people doing that.
And I think that in general, people mention all these benefits, and there are objective benefits to microservices. There are benefits to going multi-cloud. There's all these benefits. And then whenever you mention a drawback, they say, oh, you just got to figure that out. That's your job to figure out, not our deal, not our problem. We're just going to go 100% with the benefits. And this lack of cost benefit analysis is really frustrating. I don't think it's a question of yes, microservices, no microservices, yes, serverless, no serverless, yes, multi-cloud, no multi-cloud. The question is how much, when does it make sense? And everyone refuses to answer that question because they want to do the next big thing to make their company look great and the next big thing to pad out their resume.
Yeah, I think I've seen the term macro services, which is just a bunch of microservices on a VM. And it's like, oh, you got to name it that? Why just, well, I will say people have been chatting and giving comments, and they feel very similar to Brandon. There's Michael's like, software is garbage. There's folks mentioning that we've gotten used to other people being the beta testers, the customer being the beta testers. I can definitely seeing that. Someone suggested using Ring Central over Slack, but I hope that was a joke. I think it was. There was a smiley face there. So thanks for those answers. So if as you're coming and listening, let us know what you think is like a big prediction or something you're going to be looking at for 2024 in the chat. We love to be able to see that. I think a number of people are feeling you though, Brandon, about that quality of software. And I think, Eric, you're right. It's probably about how we approach the software and how we're distributing that stuff too much. And it's just too hard for human to go and figure out what that code looks like and what's wrong with it and where the problem is. I would agree with that. So some people had suggested and that they're looking forward to improvements in blockchain, which I'm not a blockchain person, so I don't have a good handle on what those were, but those blockchain experts, they're really figuring out new ways of being able to take data and kind of get other people to be able to grab and make and use it securely. So I'm looking to see what those are going to be in the future.
I'll go further for blockchain specifically. Yeah. We talk about benefits and drawbacks. I think it's been less about why do blockchain and more about why not do blockchain. And now we're learning all of the many reasons why not to do blockchain. So if the member of the audience has an example of how blockchain solves a problem that existing technology does not solve better, please let me know, because I really don't want to write off all this technology without really exhausting it. But it's been so many years and I have not heard one example.
You had someone, Jason just posted up that Brandon loves blockchain.
Yeah, Jason's heard this rant
before. I think there's a sarcasm in that chat message. A couple of people have mentioned AI. And so I will say my prediction for 2024 is people starting to figure out how to use AI, generative AI I'm talking about. I feel like our old school AI of machine learning, which was like analyzing large amounts of data and trying to come up with, this is normal versus not normal. I think it would have worked it would work better if our environments weren't just so wacky, like, just from our perspective, when we do like log collection analysis and stuff like that, every team kind of just works a little bit different. And that it makes that kind of machine learning really difficult to do. I think with generative AI, I'm excited about being able to use generative AI to better ask questions about the data that is stored inside of a data store that we don't really know too well. And so, seeing promises of being able to analyze, bunch of security data, and then being able to ask the question, which of my virtual machines are running too hot? And I can ask that question and see the results and the query that they use to go and get that. And then it may be 80% correct, and that would be great. And then you can tune it a little bit. I don't think AI is going to fix all the problems, but I think it's going to be another tool to help us make sense of kind of all these different data and these different stores. And I don't have to become an expert in a new programming language to get started with asking those questions. That's kind of what I'm excited about.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, how long is it going to be until, you're in a log analytics workspace or Sentinel and I can say, show me all of the IP addresses that have made a request from this service principal in the last hour. And I don't have to know KQL, and I don't have to understand the structure of that table or any of the columns. And it's just going to say, here you go, Eric, here's all the data that you asked for. And generatively, if there's an anomaly in there, how interesting will it be when one of those IP addresses is an anomaly? And it can then ask you, hey, Eric, would you like to disable this service principal? And I can just say, yeah, sure. And I think that's really where the expansion is going to be is, can our analysts just be talking with a generative AI bot instead of having to do a lot of that work themselves?
I agree. And I think it's important to recognize that you still need to have that human element today. You still need that context. Currently, robots don't know the difference between good and bad. They don't know what your business case is. So similarly to how I've always been frustrated with static analysis tools, which are able to find bugs, but not the most important bugs that matter to your industry or any issues related to business logic flaws. Similarly, AI is only going to be able to find issues if you drive it in the directions that make sense in the context of your business. Because one transaction in one environment may be perfectly legitimate and not in another one. So don't get rid of all the humans. We still need the humans. Please keep them around.
Yeah, it's another tool. It's just, I feel like it's another tool. It's a good tool, maybe, if we use it properly, but I think it's another tool. So someone asked this question in the chat: what tools are considered top choices for security monitoring for 2024? So I'll ask each of you, what is a tool that you're looking at either you're going to use more, or you think it's going to get better in 2024? We'll start with Eric.
Oh, this is a tough one. For security monitoring, we've done a lot of work with, the traditional kind of like the SIM solutions, the SOAR solutions, the Splunks, the security onion stacks, etc. And I think it kind of circles back to my cost comment earlier, where to use those, especially from a multi-cloud context, you're just getting hammered with egress charges to pull all of that data out. So I think the solution, and it's not a great solution, this is me redesigning or re-architecting a monitoring stack to avoid costing. But I think the notion of a security data lake per cloud is really catching on, where if I'm in Google, I've got BQ and maybe a little bit of Chronicle happening, but I'm going to keep that siloed there. And then Azure, I'm going to probably in Log Analytics and Sentinel, and in AWS, you're probably in the new like CloudTrail data lake-ish service. And a lot of that conversation goes down to, can I use those tools to get the fine-grained things that I need? And then maybe you've got a very fine-grained set of events that I'm then maybe going to push out of the cloud into that central monitoring stack. If you've got an actual event and a run book set up for it, that's probably the only reason for that event to be leaving and going to the central Splunk instance, for example, that maybe you're running on-prem. So I think that is a loaded question. It's hard to just pick one anymore because of all the cost associated with it. So you almost need to be an expert in a lot of different.
So it sounds like better integrating between these different things. Yeah, I could definitely see that. Brandon, how about you?
We're at time, and you could answer this question way better than me, so I'm going to kick it back to you.
All right, I will say for security monitoring, I would say probably the big thing I would be thinking at is being able to show like your resources, what is the activity and the posture at the same time in a way that makes sense of what's going on. I see too many tools saying, here's a bunch of alerts, and then you have to go somewhere else to say, is this thing even healthy or not? So being able to combine those two together, I can see, and there's some tools out there that now they're doing a better job of that. And so I could definitely see that happening. So I want to say thank you to my panel, because we are at about time. Thank you so much. And thank you for those who have joined online and have asked questions and engaged. I really do appreciate it. Eric and Brandon, have a great day. And hopefully I'll see you at a SANS class sometime soon.
Sounds good. Take care. Thanks for having us.
All right. Thank you.